Return to Mayberry is an American television reunion movie for the 1960s American sitcoms The Andy Griffith Show and, to an extent, Mayberry RFD, as well. The movie premiered on April 13, 1986, on NBC, and was the highest-rated telemovie of 1986. 16 of the original cast members were united for the movie, and its success could have led to additional Mayberry programs. But Griffith was committed to Matlock for the 1986-87 season. Most of the characters from the old series are revisited. The slightly milquetoast Howard Sprague, in an attempt to look younger, is seen in various hues of hair color. Gomer Pyle, having returned to civilian life following his stint in the Marines, shares filling station duties with his cousin Goober, and the pair are seen together for only the third time in the history of the franchise. The former town drunk has become sober and now drives an ice cream truck. Plot: Andy Taylor, now living in Cleveland as a U.S. postal inspector, returns to his native Mayberry to see his son Oppie become a first-time father, and also to run in the soon-to-be-held sheriff's election, as he has already asked County Clerk Howard Sprague to prepare the paperwork. But when Andy learns that his old deputy and cousin Barney Fife, now back in Mayberry working as acting sheriff, announced his own candidacy while Andy was on the road back to town, he quietly tells Oppie, "I won't run against Barney." Andy goes to visit Barney at the sheriff's office. Barney tells Andy that he decided to run for sheriff because nobody else would, and then his opponent Ben Woods decided to run shortly afterward. Andy then mentions that Barney's old girlfriend, Thelma Lou, newly divorced after less than 2 years, is back in Mayberry staying with her sister. Barney nonchalantly says he'll eventually go and see her. As Barney leaves to teach a safety class at school, they're accosted by Ernest T. Bass standing on the base of the town flagpole, and who gives them a cryptic rhyme: "Your hair was brown but now it's gray, make that monster go away." The monster is revealed to be an elaborate publicity stunt orchestrated by young businessman Wally Butler, who bought an Oriental restaurant outside of town and added a hotel. Butler found some old dragon artifacts, presumably left by the restaurant's former owners, and hired Ernest T. to perpetuate a hoax at Myers Lake to attract customers by stealing some neighbors' chickens and dogs to make people think they were eaten by the monster. Andy goes to the cemetery to visit Aunt Bee's grave, and finds Thelma Lou there visiting her uncle's gravesite. Thelma Lou laments about Barney's not calling, but she follows Andy to the school where Barney, in clown makeup, is play acting for a classroom of students. Though embarrassed by his appearance, Barney accepts an invitation to dine with Thelma Lou at her sister's house. Andy ducks out while the two are reacquainting and drives over to his old house where Oppie and his wife Eunice live just as she is about to go into labor. In a panic, Oppie accidentally crashes his car into a tree, and Andy volunteers his car to take them to the hospital. On the way, Andy's engine begins to falter, and they only make it as far as Gomer and Goober's garage before Eunice gives birth to a boy. Shortly afterward, Barney pulls up, already irritated by the fact that no one told him about the birth, which happened all too fast. But his anger is exacerbated when Gomer and Goober mistakenly refer to Andy as sheriff. Later that night, he visits Andy to apologize for how he acted, saying he also felt left out of being part of seeing Oppie become a father. The next day, Gomer and Goober are out fishing at Myers Lake when Gomer sees a monster sticking its head up out of the water. Andy and Barney arrive shortly afterward, but Barney doesn't believe Gomer's story until he sees what looks like monster tracks in the mud. When Gomer later shows Barney a picture he took of Goober with something unidentifiable in the background, Barney becomes convinced there's a monster in the lake. Wally Butler later invites Barney to his new inn, secretly gives him a contribution check for his campaign, and invites him in to talk to a TV news reporter about his discovery. Andy's wife Helen follows Andy back to Mayberry and only then finds out that Andy has opted out of the sheriff's race, and Oppie receives a highly lucrative job offer from a newspaper in Binghamton, New York. With Barney's opponent Woods now running an aggressive campaign to discredit Barney, Howard and Oppie try to convince Andy to re-enter the race, saying that Barney doesn't stand a chance. Meanwhile, former town drunk Otis Campbell, now long sober and driving an ice cream truck, is serving customers near Myers Lake when he sees the monster pop out of the lake. Otis quickly races to the courthouse to tell Barney. Despite Andy's pleading with Barney to drop the hunt because people were laughing at him, Otis' report convinces Barney to resume the hunt. Later, when Andy and Barney take Helen and Thelma Lou out to dinner at Butler's Inn, Andy notices some old pictures of the restaurant when it was still Oriental. Noticing a particular picture with a dragon's head in it, Andy is inspired to do some investigating of his own. He drives up to the hills near Myers Lake, and visits the Darlings' homestead, where Ernest T. hangs out. Briscoe Darling and his daughter Charlene are delighted to see Andy, but Ernest T. nervously and repeatedly asks Andy to leave. After sitting in with the Darlings to play a song, Andy manipulates Ernest T. into telling him when the monster will show up in Myers Lake again. The next day, Helen and Thelma Lou are having lunch at Butler's Inn. When Helen mentions Andy and Barney are both up at Myers Lake intent on trapping the monster, Butler excuses himself and hurriedly drives off to the lake. At the lake, Barney clumsily baits a trap while Andy spots Ernest T. going into a nearby stone quarry shed. Butler arrives at the shed to futilely get Ernest T. to reel the monster back in, but Andy catches both of them in the act. Barney and Howard follow Andy to the shed, and Andy makes it look like Barney plotted to make Butler overconfident and force his hand. Howard takes pictures of Barney with the dragon's head for the newspaper, and Andy tells Butler about the legal consequences of his actions, but suggests that Ernest T. return the stolen chickens and dogs, and then implores Butler to try honesty with his next business venture, saying, "It works better." Later, at a victory rally for Sheriff Fife, when Barney learns that Andy opted out of the sheriff's race to give Barney a better chance to win, he humbly asks the crowd to vote for Andy as a write-in candidate because "that's exactly what I'm gonna do." Andy is eventually elected the new sheriff. Oppie accepts the newspaper job in Binghamton, and Barney and Thelma Lou finally get married, with Ernest T. and the Darlings joining in the celebration. The final shot is of Sheriff Taylor and Deputy Fife folding up an American flag at the end of the day on Mayberry's Main Street. Changes. Most of the surviving cast members of The Andy Griffith Show reprise their roles in the reunion movie. One notable exception was Francis Bavier, who played Aunt Bee for all 8 seasons as well as 2 seasons of Mayberry RFD. Bavier had retired shortly after leaving RFD in 1970. Her absence was explained by a scene in which Andy visits the cemetery where Aunt Bee is buried. Eleanor Donahue and Jack Burns were 2 other cast members not to be involved in the movie. Some of the main RFD regulars, including Sam Jones, son Mike, and Millie Swanson, all of whom were first introduced on the last season of The Andy Griffith Show itself, were also absent. Former series regulars Howard McNear, Hope Summers, and Paul Hartman were all long deceased. Also in the movie, Gomer and his longtime sweetheart Luann had, implicitly, gone their separate ways, as Gomer was shown as being unattached in this TV movie. No explanation is given as to the end of Gomer's career in the U.S. Marine Corps, other than his civilian presence in Mayberry. Barney and Thelma Lou finally married in the movie. In a 1966 episode, Barney returned home to rekindle their relationship only to find out that Thelma Lou had married someone else. In the movie, it is briefly mentioned by Andy that Thelma Lou's first marriage had lasted only 18 months, although Barney quickly corrects him, stating that they were only married 16 months. Regardless, their decades-long courtship finally ended in matrimony. There is also no mention of Andy and Helen having any children, although Griffith and Corsort's final guest appearance in Mayberry RFD was in the episode Andy's New Baby. Since the outdoor sets from the original series had long since been destroyed, the producers had to rebuild the town set from scratch. As a result, there were some differences between this version of Mayberry and the one from the TV series. One of the more notable differences was that the main street went past the courthouse rather than ending at the building, and that there was a small island with a flagpole on the street in front of the courthouse. As Richie Cunningham did in Ron Howard's later series Happy Days, Ron Howard's Oppie also had a brother who vanished without mention, Andy, Jr., christened on Mayberry RFD in the episode Andy's New Baby. Apparently neither attended Barney's wedding nor was his name brought up during the course of this film. Reception. Although Return to Mayberry was a ratings success, its critical reception was more ambiguous. A review in the New York Times opined that its slow pace, extremely modest level of humor and straightforward and predictable plotting make Return to Mayberry a less appealing reunion for the audience than it may have been for its actors. Time discussed the film only when it was in its last days of production, and, despite the laudatory, even on TV's crowded reunion calendar, Return to Mayberry as a special event offered no substantive comment on the merits of the finished product. More modern reviews have been kinder, calling it marvelous blast from the past, and a reunion that worked largely because the producers kept the original flavor of the series yet brought the show up to date. 2004 rebroadcast. In a few U.S. markets, Mayberry was controversially rebroadcast on Veterans Day in 2004. Some ABC affiliates used Mayberry as a replacement for the network's unedited rebroadcast of the film, Saving Private Ryan. These affiliates opted out, because Ryan included language which the Federal Communications Commission had, in March 2004, ruled indecent and profane. Mayberry was seen as a safe alternative, despite the fact that Ryan had already aired on the network in 2001 and 2002. The then chief executive of Citadel Communications, the main affiliate owner to rebroadcast Mayberry, cited the then recent 2004 U.S. presidential election as a justification. "We're just coming off an election where moral issues were cited as a reason by people voting one way or another," the executive claimed, and, in my opinion, the commissioners are fearful of the new Congress. In the end, however, no complaints were lodged against ABC affiliates which showed Ryan, perhaps because even conservative watchdogs like the Parents Television Council supported the unedited rebroadcast of the film. Confusion with other reunions. In 2003, 4 surviving cast members came together for a reunion special that featured the actors reminiscing about their time on the show. The production was interspersed with archival footage and short-filmed interviews with some of the other surviving cast members. This special was called The Andy Griffith Show. Back to Mayberry. Some media outlets have occasionally called this show, too, Return to Mayberry, which led to some confusion between the two productions. The title, The Andy Griffith Show, Back to Mayberry, distinguishes this production from a 1993 production titled The Andy Griffith Show Reunion. Cast: Andy Griffith as Andy Taylor, Ron Howard as Oppie Taylor, Don Knotts as Barney Fife, Howard Morris as Ernest T. Bass, Jim Nabbers as Gomer Pyle, George Lindsay as Goober Pyle, Annetta Corsort as Helen Crumb Taylor, Jack Dodson as Howard Sprague, Betty Lynn as Thelma Lou, Maggie Peterson as Charlene Darling, Denver Pyle as Briscoe Darling, Hal Smith as Otis Campbell, Rodney Dillard as Rodney Darling, Doug Dillard as Doug Darling, Mitch Dane as Mitch Darling. Other media. The film was originally released on NTSC VHS in 1989 by Video Treasures under license from Viacom. It was re-released in 1994 by Regent Entertainment. Later, the rights reverted to Paramount, which had been sold to Viacom in 1994. The film was re-released on DVD as a bonus feature included with the Andy Griffith Show boxed set. Film was released as a special feature on the DVD The Andy Griffith Show 50th Anniversary, The Best of Mayberry in December 2010.